Okay, so once the chassis is undone of all its parts that just hamper you for doing the restoration, you might want to check first of all the tube sockets, because the original tube sockets are those black round things you see here. And inside, I don't know if you can see it, but inside each hole of the original sockets, there are like two tiny prongs which grip the tube's pin. So check if those prongs are still in one piece, because if they aren't, then you certainly need to undo the tube socket and place a new one, like I had to do for this one. I used a nice brass bezel covered ceramic gold plated tube socket, just for the heck of it. I could have used a cheap one, but I liked the looks of this one, and well, I just used it. Also, I couldn't find the right type of whatchamacallit, these little thingies here which hold down the tube sockets, and I replaced them. I drilled them out carefully so as not to damage any part below, and then when the time came to attach the new tube socket, I used two stainless steel screws, round head stainless steel screws. Stainless steel mainly because it doesn't rust, it doesn't oxidize, it stays as nice as when you bought them. So that's why I used those. I had to grind them down though a little bit because they were a bit too long. So I had to have screws of about 6 to 7 mil tread, and they were 12 mil, so I had to grind them down a little bit. But otherwise, they're fine. They're nice. So I used those. The capacitors, in my opinion, should be rated at least for 100 volts. Why? Well, because the B plus voltage that juices this radio is 90 volts. Now, since it's a battery, spikes in voltage are not to be expected, to the contrary of power supplies which are attached to the mains. So I think if you use capacitors which are rated for 100 volts, that should be plenty. There was a electrolytic, in fact there's only one electrolytic in the whole radio, and it's this one. This is the original electrolytic, and it's rated at 8 microfarad and 150 volts. So okay by me. I mean, if you want to go with capacitors of 150 volts or even higher, well, okay. I mean, that probably won't harm anything. But I think if they are rated for 100 volts, you should be safe. Unfortunately, I had to replace all the capacitors and all the resistors, because when I measured a few of them, they were always off by 30 or 40% from the value they should be, which is mentioned on the schematic. So rather than take the risk of leaving an original part in the radio but which was off considerably from its intended value, I just decided to replace them all. Where possible, and if I had some, I used some old-fashioned resistors, which still were still had their proper values, and where I didn't have old resistors, like this one for example down there, I use new resistors, carbon type resistors, 1/4 watt. That should be plenty, as you can see here. These ones are all these resistors are all 1/4 watt, and they do nicely. Strangely enough, these resistors, these ones here, these tiny ones, are 1/4 watt, but old-fashioned resistors, which are also 1/4 watt, are almost double or 3 times their size. Like this one is almost double as big, and this one is almost 4 times as big. You know, so well, that just illustrates progress in technology. By the way, the whole thing was stuffed with paper caps, like this one, coated in paraffin or wax. I think they are paper caps, and these are nasty things. They melt, they stick, they are not easy to read, and they simply don't look nice. So I replaced them with ceramic capacitors rated at the correct voltage, you know, like these little ones here. These in fact are coupled in parallel because I needed the 200 picofarad value and I only had 2 100s. Now you can see the size of these ceramic capacitors. They are positively tiny. Yeah, if you compare that to this, you know, I mean, well, no comment. So for the microfarad range capacitors, I use these Mallory's. They look nice. They are certainly rated high enough. This one is rated 250 volts, so these work pretty good. So then there's one last difficult thing to keep in mind. Down there you see the band switch. Now on the band switch are soldered a few wires and at least one capacitor, as you can see. Now to work down there you certainly need to undo the variable capacitor here. You must, because if you don't, you're going to burn up everything with your soldering iron, and well, simply you really need to unmount this capacitor. Also, I advise you to use a solder pump like this. You know, there are cheap models. This happens to be an expensive model, but there are plenty out there which are cheap. I mean, $5 or maybe even less. Buy one of these, because I don't know if this is typical for this chassis, but all the soldering lugs and even the feet of the tube sockets were really coated in huge globs of solder, and I mean huge, really huge. So you need to suck away all that solder. Okay, so let me set up now the tubes which I took out of the radio in the tube tester, and let's see together if they are still good.